All right. Good today. Today, I want to touch something called how you move around in Blender. I know I've touched this many times before. It's like the no-brainer. You want to move around or want something intentional. I want to build something in 3D and 3D viewport. So, what primarily I want to introduce you to today is just in this video is how to move them around or the tools you can use and other extremes. Because there are many ways you can move objects around in Blender. So the first one, which is the obvious one that you know already, is to use this tool. The move tool, the rotate tool, the scale tool. Now these are the obvious ones. The shortcut for the move tool is G, for the rotate tool is R, and for the scale tool is S. S. So then we now have this one called the transform tool, which is T. This one, transform tool, which is T. This is here. T. Now with this transform tool, this fourth one here, you can see that it has all the tools. This is the move tool, this is the rotate tool, and this is the scale tool. It has everything engraved in one. Now that's the beauty of this is you don't need to always go back and forth and be moving everything. But the disadvantage is that you may make mistakes because there are times where you want to move just the scale from the middle, but then there's an hindrance because of the rotate and the move. So most of the time, I only use them individually. Scale, rotate, and then we have the typical move tool. So on this part here, you can also find this part, this one here. We call this the selection box. Now, if I click on this, you discover that nothing appears. So what this one is basically is to select things. So when you drag over your object like this, or if you have more than one object and bring a new one in, so and I drag over it, so you notice something that's it. So dragging over it gives me an advantage out that I can have other. Alright. So we have this. So dragging it around will give us access to select more than one. So there are many ways you can do. You can select. The first one is if I hold this down, you can see create. You can see um select box. You can see select in circle. You can see lasso select. If I click on lasso select, I can select like this. So many times they are useful. Let me move this one here. Tab. This is the case. Let's assume I want to select something at random. I can click on lasso select and then I'll select things at random. And I've also used this other one called circle select. For circle select, all I need is have like a brush. I just paint over my selection and I'm good to go. So then we have the box select. The box select is the obvious one. Just stretch around, click on this. But when you are working on some areas like more detail, most of the time I use circle select. This one gives me this feeling. Alright. So then we have the tweak. So this one can you have to select it individually. Let me talk about. So that's that. So we also have this one called annotate. Now this annotate basically is for you to there are other ways to use annotate. One of it is to create something called a fractal. But for now, it's just for you to give yourself details on your screen. Let's say you're trying to explain to someone or like you are presenting a model to a client and then they're asking you, what does this mean? What does this mean? And while you are presenting it, there are times when what you are saying, they may not know what you are pointing at. So You can just use your annotate to write something on it. You can use it to write something on your screen just to let your client see that you're trying to build something. Just to explain, if you rotate, you notice that it is literally floating. And then there are other functions as we go in the class or one of those videos I will explain this annotate and how to use them. Then we have this measure. So this basically is to measure what you're creating. So now let's assume, let me see, let me use this one. Let me move to the front view. So I want to measure the height of this. So this I'll click here, then drag it down and click here. So I have this is the size in meter 0.59999. That is 0.6 meter, and that's all. Let me finish. That is this for measure. Most of the time you may not necessarily use this. So then we have add cube, add cone. All these are just literally you adding cube somewhere. You see, add cube. Then I switch it to add cone, or let's use add cylinder. So I can click on this area. I can also hold shift to constrain it and pull it out. Beautiful in its own self. But I rarely use this, but there are times when you will need it. There are times when you need it. Yeah, so you may not find this one, or you'll find this other one. So that is all the tools on this side. So the shortcut to activate it, you can press T to hide it and T to return it back. They are the sidebar tools. Sidebar tools. T to activate, T to deactivate. Alright. So this part we press N will reveal this and N will hide it. N reveals, N will hide it. I will do a video that explains how to hide all most of your assets in your scene. I'll do a video on that, but for now let's just run with it. Alright. So, so now if I click on this, I notice that this is the move tool because of this. Let me click on this back. If I press G is to grab. I can move it around as I want randomly. But when I press, I want to constrain it to an axis because in 3D we have three axes. We have the x-axis, the y-axis, and the z-axis. And all these axes move, they are like directions. So let me do this. So when you look up here, this red here, based on this side, look at this red part here. The red here is x, the green here is y, and the blue is upwards, which is z. You want to move this one in the x-axis. So the x-axis, if I'm facing this direction, you want to move it away from me or towards me, following this line, this red line. That's x-axis. So I'll press G and press X. So you can move it back and forth. You can also press G and Y. You can move it left and right. G and Z up and down. You can also press G and press X, X. Or let's say G, X. So okay, now if I click on G, I want to do something called moving it. Let me click on two things. G, X, X. Or G, X, X. So you notice something happened when I press G, X, and X again. Notice that the line became thicker. Now that is me trying to switch it from local to global. Let me show you in a much more, yeah, let's use here tab mode. Now if I press G and I press X, notice that it's going like this. And I press X one more time. Right. So when I press this and I press G, X, G, X, X. Oh, some reason is not giving me what I want. Alright. So basically the XX is the first X will respond to this area. Look at it here. Up here, you can see somewhere something called global, local, normal, blah, 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 blah. If I click on this part and I say, if I change this to local, look at this. Let me change the global. So this is the direction it's facing globally. This is how it looks like. But when I change this from global to local, you have noticed that it looks as though nothing changed, but something has changed. Well, let's go to normal. So I click on this and I say this is how it looks like globally. This is how it looks like normal by normal. This is how it looks like by parent object. This is how it looks like by cursor by view. This is how it looks like by view. So wherever it's facing, wherever my view is, I'm looking at it now. So the top is facing me. If I turn it, it's still facing me. If I change it to global, so by default, the direction of your selection is in global view by default, or you can change it to local, you can change it to normal, you can change it to view, you can change it to cursor as you want. So let's click on these two and I say this I looks like local. Let me use global and see. Same thing. So global and local in this currently now, global and local are facing the same direction. But basically, what the difference between global and local is for global, the direction of your cursor, this thing here is called your cursor, and this one here, this tiny one here, let me delete this so you can see. Yeah, this one here, it's called your 3D cursor. Or this is your 3D cursor. I'll get there soon. So the direction of this reflects where your this gimbal here is a gimbal here. GAMBAL. This handle here, wherever it's facing is determined by this. So for globally says that your every of your objects, let me switch them, every of your objects faces the same direction, no matter what. So let me bring this out and I'll show you something now. All right. So now look at this of this one. This one here, when I press global, it's facing this direction. I press this one also, it's facing this direction, facing towards the right. The green is pointing towards the right. This also is pointing towards the right. When I switch this to local, this is still facing towards the right. But look at this one. It's now facing downward. Look, this initially, let me change back to global. Globally, it's facing the right. This one also is facing the right. Nothing changed. But when I click on this and I change it to local, the local of this one is still facing the same direction as the global. But this one, the local is now facing downward. So for global, what it means basically, the global, the handle always face the same direction. But for local, if you rotate the object, the cursor will try to align itself with with the new direction. So this local is how does it look like? How does it look like now? For instance, let me give an example. Um, if someone is standing in your front, no matter how you stand, probably if you bend or stand on your hand, wherever, that person will still be standing in your front the way they are standing. But now imagine you now tie that person with yourself. Now, the moment you want to do a backflip or a somersault or want to stand on your leg, that person will follow you to align to your new position because you and that person are tied together. So that's the difference between global and local. So there are times when if you want to move something along a particular axis, for instance, if I click on this, I press G, let me go back here. I press G, let me use global, for instance. Click on it G and I press X. This is how X look like naturally. But I press X again, X, Y, sorry, G, X. You can see that this is G normally. When I press the Y, this is Y globally. When I press Y one more time, this is Y locally. So now the first G is to grab, the second G is the global selection, well, depending on what you have here. So G, Y, when I press Y again, it now becomes local. That's local direction. Right, let me change this to global, to local, by the way. GY, you can notice the first thing is local. If I press Y again, it will give me global. Now, depending on the direction you want to move your object, so there are times when the moment you rotate that object, it it will generate and it will, the moment you rotate the object, you will have a feeling where this will generate something like this. That okay, now I can move in this new direction instead of the old direction which was like this. All right. So now I mentioned something about the 3D cursor. Yeah, so this stuff here is called a 3D cursor. Let me delete this so you can see it. Yeah, this thing here. Most of the time it's always at the center. Most of the time it's always at the center. So now I'm pressing Shift S. You can see all these options. You can see selection to cursor, blah 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 blah. The first one I want to touch is called the cursor to world origin. So now the center here is the world origin, the world origin. So this cursor most of the time is always at the world origin at the center. That's why when you press Shift A, all your selection or whatever you are creating will always be in the center. But the moment I move this cursor and I say if I press Shift and I right click here now, this cursor jumps here. If I press Shift A to create a new mesh, instead of creating it here, to create it in where the new cursor is. So I move this one now and I say here Shift and right click on this area. So now normally this guy should be in the middle normally, but now I've moved it here Shift and right click. When I press Shift A, my new mesh or my new model will be appearing here. So every of your new created model, your new created mesh, your new created all these mesh, curve, metaball, volume, all of them, they'll be created where the cursor is. So that's why if I Shift S again and say cursor toward origin, if I click on it and the cursor jumps back to the middle, then I press Shift A and I try to create something again, Shift A and I try to create that same cube. Now you notice that it is at the center again. So this is the cursor in a nutshell. Now there are times when you want this. Let me okay. Let me shift and right click. Now the cursor has jumped here. So if I want to make a new object and I want it to instead of me making it on the world origin, at the center is the world origin. This area here where everything cross path is the world origin. So now I've moved the cursor. Let me go back. I've moved this is the cursor, Shift S, or to cursor toward origin to make it at the center. But Shift and I click on right click. This is the cursor. So if I want to create a new mesh, that new mesh should be where the cursor is, like I said earlier. Shift A, you have this. So that's quite and that is the beauty of it. You can create your mesh anywhere you want at any time. Now for adventure, you now let's say you made a mistake. Shift A, better to Shift S, cursor toward origin, Shift S, Shift S, cursor toward origin. Now, let's say now you made a mistake, and you want to make this guy, this object, you want to move it to the center. Now you can go the normal way that we do normal, that we drag and move around. But if you want to be very accurate, all you just need is to right click, you will see set origin, and then you see geometry to origin, and then right click, set origin, geometry to origin. We can have origin to 3D cursor. We click on it. Now this has become this thing here, this handle is the origin. It's a new origin of this guy. So let me right click back and I right click. I say set origin. Origin, you can see origin to 3D, origin to 3D cursor. Yes, that's the first step. Right click again, set origin and say geometry to origin and bam. Let me move this out. So this one, click on this also. First, this thing here, this blue, this gimbal, this direction. The reason why they are in the middle is because of their origin. So I will explain how to change the origin very soon. So you right click and you say set origin, origin to 3D cursor. So it will move the selection. So when you click on this now, see that the origin is here. If I click on this one, the origin is in center. So I will right click on this. Now, if you want this origin to return back to the object or to the model, you right click, you say set origin and you say origin to geometry. So to move this origin back to the geometry. So while you are modeling something, if parameter, you notice that when you are clicking on it, the origin is jumping here and there. All you just need is just right click on it and you say set origin, origin, origin to geometry. But now I want the origin to go to 3D cursor. This is 3D cursor here, this 3D cursor here. Right click, set origin, origin to 3D cursor. Yep, then right click, geometry to origin. So to just snap like that. Yeah. So that's the beauty of the origin. So you can just can shift and right click here. So you shift A, can build something here, floating area. Let me delete all this. So let's now say I want the, I can just click on this, I can click on this. Now the origin is here, right? I can click on this and right click and say set origin. And I will say origin to geometry. Origin or shift S. You see cursor. Yeah, you can see that shift S. You can see cursor toward origin, cursor to grid, cursor to this. I'm looking for cursor to active. Yeah, cursor to active. You can notice that the 3D cursor jumps to this place. That's the first step. Then I can now right click on this and say origin to 3D cursor. And then I'll right click and say geometry to origin. So it just jump to that place. So that's how you, something we call working faster in Blender. So that you work faster in Blender. Let me shift S again and say cursor to world origin. Now let me now create something one, two, and one more, or three. Now let's now say I want these three things to rotate around this one origin. Now all of them, when I click on them, you notice that this gimbal, this selection is at the center. You can see this dot at the center. Click on this one, look at the dot at the center, and this also the dot at the center. So if I rotate now, it is rotating along that center. It is in graphics we call it anchor point, or here we call it origin point. So if I want this to rotate along the origin point of this one, what I do is I'll right click on this, I'll click on this, then I'll right click and you see origin, origin to geometry. So I'll click on this, shift S, you see cursor to active. So the cursor, click the cursor to normal. Why? Shift S, cursor, click the cursor to active, is active on here. Shift S, yeah, it has jumped like that. Then I'll now click on this and say I'll right click and now say origin to 3D cursor. So now anytime I select this one, the origin point is at the center of this one. If I click on this one, the origin point at the center. If I click on this one, the origin at the center. But this one, the origin of this one is at the center of this one. So now, if I want to rotate this, and I click on R and I try to rotate, you notice that it's rotating along around that one. So this one also, I'll do the same thing. I would right click and say origin to 3D cursor. So now these two, when I select both of them and I try to rotate them, they are all rotating along this. And how do I arrive at this? There are other complex way or much more interesting way to do this, but this is like the foundational. So to accept the reason why is first thing, set the 3D cursor to the geometry. Then set right click on this and set the origin of this one to where the 3D cursor is. Let me shift A back, shift S and say cursor toward origin. So boom. So right click on this and say origin to geometry. So to return back to the center. Origin to geometry. Yeah, that's that. Yeah, that's about that. And also I mentioned something in one of our classes about all these faces. They are called faces, but so there is a reason why we have them. They're like the foundational build-up. They're the foundational build-up of every mesh you have. So from vertex, four vertex with two vertex will form one edge, and four edges will form one face. Now the faces are build-ups. You can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. They're all build-ups. You can see them 4, 4, 4, 4 like that. Now there are times when while you are working, you want to add more. Let me go back to this. So to add more segmentation, you can just go to that will use the edge loop by the way. You click on the edge loop cut. All right, and so we're adding more to this. But there are times when you may want to create those edges or these boxes before you start work, and that's when this comes in. There's some objects or meshes that on start shift A. If I click on let's say UV sphere, let me open this up. You notice that in the UV sphere there's something with a place called segment. So this segment is or this build up. If I reduce this now, you can see that it is increasing and it is increasing and decreasing the segment, which is interesting. So there are times when while you are working, you don't need too much segment because the more segments you have, the less the more complex your modeling experience will be. So it's advisable that you start with a simple model, and as the more you go, you begin to build a more complex one. So this one now, let me reduce it to like let's say to 8, and this part also to like 8. So we have 8 8. So if I want to make this one very sharp and very smooth, all I need is I can either right click and say shade smooth. But if this is not what I want, I will go to the modifier and search for subdivide. Yeah. So this subdivide will help me divide it in the way I want, and then I can also right click and now shade smooth. So we have dash smooth edges. So now this is a modifier. So if I remove the modifier now, for instance, you see that all my edges are still there. If I bring back the modifier, you see everything is round and smooth again. So the modifier in themselves, they are like working non-destructively. All right. So that's about this. So to smoothen this also, now this is a cube. I can tap and say I want more. Let me add more edge loop to my wonderful looking cube or boring looking cube. But now let me create a new cube. This one is already taking space. Space it. So when I shift A and then go to the cube, pull it back. Now looking at this cube, Notice that the faces are already set in stone. It looks as though they are set in stone because I cannot add or remove from them. Even in the construction process of the cube, notice that there's nothing like segment here. Nothing like segment. So I'll delete the faces. If A, create a cube again, move it out. Now there's something called subdivide in Blender, and it is when you right click, you will see subdivide. So I click on subdivide, I can increase this automatically. I can increase this to as many as I want, which is beautiful. You can see I can reduce this, and this work not just for cube, for every of the objects. So I click on this also, I tap and see this is nice, but I want more edge loop. I'll just right click and say subdivide, and it gives me a subdivide. Very neat and very nice in themselves. That's that about that. And then while you are working, you notice something that I can also change this cube into I can also change this cube into a sphere. That is like, let me add that as the last part, the bonus point of this video. You go to faces, you have mesh, transform, and then mesh, transform, and then you see to sphere. I click on to sphere, I just have to move left and right. So my cube is transforming into a sphere. Pretty beautiful. So that's that about this video. I will add, if you have any question on this video, please let me know so I can explain it in other videos. So see you in the next one.